Shalom, shalom. It's an honor and delight to be here with Tal Keinan, who is an American-born entrepreneur and social activist and a graduate of Israel's Air Force Academy and is quite involved as an expert in military ethics. So thanks for taking time to talk.
Thank you.
There's been a lot of very positive buzz about your book, God is in the Crowd. This was an advanced copy, although it is out on the market now, published by Random House. How has the receptivity been so far?
I think the good news is it's striking a chord with an older audience.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Jewish and Christian.
Oh, interesting.
It's not quite resonating with the younger crowd yet.
Okay.
We need to figure out how to make that
Okay,
work.
that's fascinating. So as you mentioned in this book, you come from a secular Jewish background, and you're on a search for your own Jewish identity in the process. And I wonder, what do you find out about yourself during that journey?
So I think my conception of Judaism, the conception that really guided the most important decisions of my life, was wrong for a long time. I reject it today. In that, growing up, I would not have been Jewish if not for anti-Semitism. That was really the only thing that kept me Jewish. And I think that for the last 2,000 years, that's really actually been a very strong, maybe in some periods of Jewish history, maybe the strongest kind of bonding force of Judaism. And I never encountered it personally. I grew up in the United States. I think my generation is probably the first that really never experienced anti-Semitism in any way that I would describe as meaningful or having any kind of impact on our lives. But I saw the picture of the boy in the Warsaw Ghetto. I was in high school. The boy with his hands up, kind of very iconic photograph from the war. And remember feeling very moved, but moved in the wrong way, which I try to describe in the book, in that there's a very obvious juxtaposition between that boy's innocence, he must be 6 or 7 years old, and the Nazi troops with their guns pointed at him, this kind of innocence versus barbarism. And that just didn't speak to me. It just, I couldn't. I looked at the Nazis. It's a very clear picture. It's worth Googling. Boy in the Warsaw Ghetto. It's the first thing that comes up in Google Images. You can see their faces very clearly, the Nazis. And they're kids. And I couldn't muster anger or certainly not hatred for these people. They just seemed irrelevant. Frankly, in a very unfortunate situation, but not that relevant. What was relevant to me in that picture is if you look at it, you see the Nazis are on the right, the boys in the middle. The boy's family or neighbors, they're being evacuated from a building. I assume it's his family and his neighbors. That's what's relevant. And you see these people that are in a kind of their body language is of shock and submission. And I was furious at them that I didn't know much about Jewish history, but I knew enough to understand that this is our story. This is the cycle. How could you not have been prepared? How could you not have had a plan B? Your primary responsibility is this boy's welfare, and you're about to, as far as I know, they're all dead within a week of that picture. Wasn't too much of a leap to think, well, hang on a second, what's my plan B? I've never really thought of myself in any identity group other than American. I was Jewish, just like I'm right-handed. It's a totally incidental factor in my life. And that's when a search began. So what is this exactly? Because there is something special about this. Today I call it family, and I think that's probably the best descriptor of what this is. Religion is not as good, in my view, as family. There are religious aspects, obviously, but I don't think that actually captures it very well, and it fits too neatly into other categories. What is it about this people that's special? My grandfather's German nationality was stripped. He just became a Jew. Something couldn't be taken away from him. Could that happen to me? That's how I got into it, and it's a terrible, terrible reason to be Jewish.
Right. So where did you journey to?
So I ended up in Israel. I'll spare you the long story, but ended up in Israel, became a citizen there, got drafted, and again, through just kind of a comedy of strange circumstances, ended up at the Air Force Academy in Israel, and flying jets a few years later. And it was really only after many years, 8 or 9 years in the Air Force, when I looked back. I have 4 brothers who stayed in the United States. my three older brothers married non-Jewish women, and I always was very close with them and with my nieces and nephews who are not Jewish. They don't identify as Jewish. And it kind of started dawning on me, this is actually a new period in Jewish history.
Right.
90% of us are in the United States and Israel, two, in my view, patently philo-Semitic jurisdictions. I say jurisdictions, I think also cultures, although I've been challenged since the book came out about anti-Semitism on the left in this country, and I accept that I might be a little bit dismissive of things that are happening. I hope it's fleeting. My instinct still is that this is something that corrects itself, but I recognize that that's not for sure. But certainly in terms of law, there's never been a federal law in the books of this country, ever, that discriminated against Jews. Can't say that about any European country. Can't say that about any Muslim country. It's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
And so it's no accident that 90% of us are here and in Israel.
Yeah.
And these philo-Semitic jurisdictions allow us to be Jews by choice. And we're not opting in. Right, 72% of non-Orthodox Jews in this country, as of the 2013 Pew survey. I bet you it's a higher number today. Are marrying non-Jews.
Yeah. So why did you write this book, God is in the Crowd? And how would you describe your basic thesis here?
So the first section of the book is called Should There Be Jews? And I asked that question actually very sincerely. It's meaning I'm willing to entertain a negative answer to that. And I don't think we should have a default knee-jerk answer of yes. There should be Jews because there should be Jews, and let's sacrifice. No, because first of all, we can't sell that to our kids. I mean, I understand them. That's right. I can't sell it to myself. Let's decide: is this something that we want to happen, to a phenomenon that we want to continue in the world? Interestingly, in book talks in the United States, I almost never, maybe once, I've gotten a negative answer to that question. Once.
Oh, really?
In Israel, I get it. It's not common.
Yeah.
Some kibbuznikim from the Air Force. Well, there'd be a much better world if not gas chambers, but if we could kind of American style marry ourselves into extinction, that would be a better world.
Wow.
Okay, it's a point of view, and we should be. We've got to embrace diversity, I think, in Judaism. I think that's part of the core of the book. So I think that's fine. But we should start with that question: should there be Jews? And then the next question, if your answer is yes, as most Jews answer, is what am I willing to do in order to make this continue? Because the two trends that I see, and because we're talking about roughly 45% of world Jewry here, 45% in Israel, slightly more in Israel. What happens in these two jurisdictions is momentous. It's not France in the 18th century. It's not Germany in the 19th century. It's momentous. If either of these two centers of Judaism loses its Jews, that could be a death blow to Judaism. I think both are a threat of losing. So in the United States, it's pretty clear. If you just run the math and assume, I mean, I put it out in the book, but it's pretty straightforward. You don't need a great explanation. But if you're having 1.9 children per family, 72% of those who marry are marrying non-Jews, and almost none of their grandchildren. And by the way, I'm not against intermarriage. We could talk about that if you're interested. But the way we deal with it today results in almost none of the grandchildren of intermarried couples being Jewish. Run it out 2 generations, the size of our grandchildren's generation of Jews in this country would be less than 5% the size of ours. The chance of meeting another Jew, forget about marrying, meeting another Jew of roughly the same age and the opposite sex in Phoenix, Arizona, in our grandchildren will be 0. Statistically, it's not going to happen. That's something we should be thinking about if we want there to be Jews. In Israel, I think the story is actually worse in that this will be a very benign extinction in the United States. It's love. It's no gas chambers. In Israel, I think it's much more traditional in that we are... I think we have failed to reach a critical consensus in Israel as to what exactly Jewish statehood means. What are we doing here exactly? And we have 3 visions that I lay out in the book that most of Israeli Jews, I think, fall into one of those 3 visions. They need to be reconciled. We don't need to agree. That's okay. But we do need a reconciliation of those visions. And what we're doing now, none of them, I think, today is on its own is adequate. They're not. But there is one group that I call the secularists in the book. many of whom are Orthodox observant Jews, but sit by seculars. I mean, their vision for Jewish statehood is a physical refuge for the Jewish people structured as a democracy.
Yeah.
That's it.
Right.
By the way, a lot of the people I have worked with over the years at Clarity, at our investment firm in Israel, might live in Ariel, but if we vote that we're leaving,
Right.
they're packing up and leaving.
Yeah.
And that's what I call a secularist.
Right.
That group is leaving. And the reason we should care about that is because that's who pays the taxes in Israel, all of the taxes. That's who fights the wars. We have another group that I call the territorialists who fight the wars, and they're wonderful on that score, but do not pay the taxes, meaning they're a fiscal burden on the country. And we have a third group that I call the theocrats, which do neither.
Yeah.
And again, not judging any of these groups, but to be clear, our physical survival in the Middle East depends on being strong militarily and strong economically to support our military strength.
So is what I heard you, I don't want to oversimplify, but what I heard as an approach towards your solution, that we don't need to choose among these various approaches, but we need a reconciliation that is a more kind of holistic package that honors that diversity, but is more robust in some sense?
Yeah, and look, what we did in the 1947, the status quo agreement, essentially created three different countries.
Right.
To be clear, we are not really citizens of the same country. The rights and obligations of citizenship are different for those three groups.
Yeah.
That is something that we're going to need to address. And I'm not saying, again, if I probably come closest to being a secularist in Israel, I'm not saying we have to be a secular society. That's not going to work. In fact, if anyone fired the first shot, the first unnecessary shot in that war, it was the secularists, I think. Right. But we do need to sit down at some point. And I think there's a legislative mechanism that can be put in place to actually do that. And I propose it in the book, and I think it's doable.
So you talked a little bit about the various camps within American Jewish life and also the various camps in Israel. We also know today that there's a greater rift between Israeli Jews and American Jews than in decades. Yeah. And I wonder how you think we might begin to start healing that process as well.
Right. So first, I think it's critical.
Yeah.
At some point, it will become unbridgeable. And that's where I don't think we're there, but we're headed in that direction. It's something we need to address early. Again, I propose something very specific. This last third of the book is really a business plan. Yeah. So I propose something very specific about that specific. But in general, I would say we need to decide what Jewish means collectively, and that's an exercise of all of Jewry together. And there are, again, I think that there are mechanisms that we can put in place that would allow us to do that. So, for example, one of the things I propose is, this goes down much better in the United States than in Israel, is let's recognize that Israel really performs two functions. It's got two separate missions. One is just to be a state, like any other state. We've got to deal with the plumbing of statehood. You need fiscal policy, you need education policy, you need healthcare policy. Everyone needs that.
Yeah.
The second is that we're the self-proclaimed nation state of the Jews.
Right.
So what does that mean for you?
Yeah.
Are you a citizen of Israel?
I'm not.
Okay. What does that mean for you? We're saying that we are your nation state. Yeah. How exactly is that the case?
Right.
So right now we have the law of return. So you have a right. You have no right to protect that right. You can't, if the majority of Jews in Israel today voted to overturn the law of return, you'd lose that right. You've got no recourse. So is it really yours? What I propose doing is, if we want this to really be the nation state of the Jews, at a time where there are almost no Jews in the world who are persecuted, there's almost no Jew in the world that needs physical refuge, right? Even in France, there's a small community in Iran. I think that's pretty much it. Every other Jew lives exactly where he or she wants to live right now. I'm not saying that's always going to be the case. Let's hope it is, but let's hope it lasts as long as possible. But we really need to decide what this is. What are we doing here? If it's not a physical refuge. So I propose let's split the government into two. We have a government, we have a Knesset that works. You can complain about how it works, but it works. That runs the state. And I think that works appropriately. And every Israeli, Jewish or not Jewish, should have a vote in how we run ourselves in everything from defense policy to healthcare.
Excuse me.
The nation state of the Jews is a separate mission.
Yeah.
It's a separate mission. Obviously they're linked. If we're not going to survive physically, then we can't be there. So they're linked. However, I think there's a way, and the mechanism I propose is the presidency of Israel, which to me is kind of a wasted function in Israeli government today. that would govern the aspects of life in Israel that make it the nation state of the Jews. Very specifically, who is a Jew? Who's eligible for full citizenship in Israel? And that's not the law of return. Yeah. The law of return is something between asylum and citizenship. If it's the wrong great-grandparent, you can come. It's the wrong grandparent, sorry. You can come, but you're not really, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. You can't marry a Jew in Israel. Right. By the way, I'm not saying that's inappropriate. I'm saying we haven't discussed that. Right. And the fact that this has become the default is a problem. That should be governed differently. The custody over the holy sites of Judaism, it's the reason we're in Israel and not in Argentina or somewhere else. It's these are our holy sites. Who gets to pray, how they get to pray, where, is not something that we can leave to a chief rabbi who's appointed and not elected. By the way, two of them currently the sons of previous chief rabbis. Right. It's not the cleanest system, and again, nothing against it. We're human beings, right? Power corrupts. That's And the third is what are the obligations of the nation state of the Jews to the Jews in the world? Yeah. What exactly are those? And today, again, we have even in Israel, we don't really know how that works. The biggest unit of the Mossad in Israel is dedicated to the safety of Jews in the world, not intelligence. Who decides that we should be allocating resources to training security guards in French Jewish schools? Did the French Jews collectively decide on that? No. Did British Jews say, take resources away from us? No. We don't really have. So those are the only three areas. But if we had an office that governed those areas legislatively and executively, I think you actually don't need a separation of powers there. That's a longer discussion. Elected by all Jews. All Jews. You, me, everybody. You're not talking about defense policy. You're not saying where this line goes, where that line goes, but you are talking about who is a Jew for purposes of full citizenship in Israel. And the other two points. That, I think, starts to bring us together. You should have a seat at the table. By the way, I understand. I think the Israeli government has inadvertently been exacerbating that tension between Israeli and American Jewry. I don't think it's on purpose, but it's definitely happening. When we say you're not really Jewish, when the chief rabbi of Israel can say, listen, everybody from Haskell Lookstein left is not on the list. And by the way, we're going to arbitrarily change the names on that list. And there's no accountability. That's right. We're saying you don't have a seat at this table.
Okay, so my last question for you. So it's amazing because you get into the nitty gritty, and I hope folks will jump into that with the business plan, as you said. But the meta message, what's the main number one takeaway you want someone who's reading this to walk away with?
So I don't know if it's as much a statement as a question, and it's right back to that question: should there be Jews? Give it a deep think, because I don't think we all need to answer in the affirmative. I don't think everyone who's born a Jew needs to die a Jew. That's okay. Not all of our kids need to be Jewish. There is a magic number, though, that if we want this enterprise to continue for generations, there is a magic number that we're going to have to hit. And I think if enough of us are asking that question in an active way, we'll actually find our way to that number. It doesn't have to be my prescription. In
a way that getting aligned with our raison d'etre will spark a deeper commitment to what actually has to be done to preserve.
I think that makes
sense. So, friends, make sure to check out Tal Keinan's God is in the Crowd, Random House Publishing. We will be putting out the podcast for the full talk later tonight as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shmuly.